for coming to the Hurricane Expo, Port St. Lucie Hurricane Expo. I'm meteorologist Michael Ehrenberg from CBS 12 News. You'll find me normally on the weekend shift, Saturday and Sunday night, 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Saturday, 6:30 and 11 on Sunday. And in case you didn't know that, if you guys go to bed early during the week, we have a 10 o'clock show on the CW34, and you can typically find me there at 10 o'clock on Mondays and Tuesdays, and sometimes I do the 3 o'clock show Monday through Wednesday, and also fill in. There's a little bit about my bio there. I've been actually at CBS 12 now for almost 18 years, believe it or not. It goes back to June of 1999. Before that, I worked for the National Weather Service down in Miami a couple years, and my original roots are up in New Jersey. How many people here are from New Jersey? How did I know there'd be a few? Lots of us here are from New Jersey or New York or Massachusetts. It seems to be the default here in South Florida. But anyway, I just want to welcome you to coming here to the Hurricane Expo. And we're going to be tracking the tropics this time around. No surprise, of course. That's why you're here. We're going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Matthew in review. Okay, that was a big scare last October. Storm came pretty close to us. And as you move further north along the Treasure Coast, the damage naturally got worse. What we can expect a little bit in 2017, some of the forecasts from both NOAA and the Colorado State University, some hurricane preparation, and I've got some behind-the-scenes photos of CBS 12, and I know lots of you are probably going to want to see those. All right, first off, Hurricane Matthew last year, back in October, we saw this storm coming almost 2 weeks ahead of time. Okay, it started off the African coast as a wave. This is Matthew developing as a tropical cyclone in the Caribbean, south of Cuba and south of Hispaniola, beginning getting its act together there in early parts of October. And then the storm moved right east of the Florida coast. We were all under hurricane warning. Everybody was told to shut her up and get their plans going. And there is the storm right there, you'll notice, a very small eye right there off the Florida coast, you'll notice, right there about 30 or 40 miles east of St. Augustine. Passed about 50 to 60 miles east of us here on the Treasure Coast. And the further north you got, again, the stronger the winds. We had winds gusting over 70 miles an hour for parts of the area from Fort Pierce north through the Vero Beach area. There is a satellite image of Hurricane Matthew, a kind of a three-dimensional perspective. And there is some damage, a little bit hard to see, but this is actually down south near Haiti and Hispaniola. You can see just a lot of damage on the coast, a lot of storm surge going well inland, and some of the buildings completely obliterated. Building codes down across Central America and outside the United States, just not as good as they are up here over the United States, so naturally the damage is pretty bad. This up off the Florida coast near St. Augustine, and you can see a lot of damage here. Look at all the, some boardwalks devastated, a lot of beach erosion. And you can see, though, inland, though, not too far inland, just off the beach, most of the buildings didn't really incur any major damage. I mean, Category 1 winds were felt up across northern and central Florida. And here is a look at the worst situation with Matthew. And you can see, you know, a lot of the docks getting ruined up there across central and south Florida. There is the official track, okay? The big issue that saved mostly Palm Beach County and to some extent the Treasure Coast was this little jog to the right here by about 30 miles. At the last moment it jogged east and then it moved north and a little bit of a jog off towards the left here. But notice this was a Category 4 hurricane. So if this storm had jogged a little bit to the left, we could have had a major hurricane here on the Treasure Coast. So we were very fortunate. Nevertheless, it moved off to the north. You notice, considering the shape of the coastline, the closer you got to North Florida, the closer the storm was. So that's why areas like St. Augustine, Daytona Beach, and Jacksonville had much worse damage than we had down here, even though it weakened from a Category 4 to a Category 3. So this gives you an indication that, you know, this was the only storm that really impacted us last year. We always tell you it only takes one hurricane. So despite what the predictions are at the beginning of the season, despite the fact that, hey, we're in October, we haven't had a storm, I think we're in the clear, you never really want to let your guard down because, again, it only takes one. Matthew's Florida impacts. 1 million customers lost power. Okay, believe it or not, there were 12 deaths from Hurricane Matthew, $2.75 billion in damage. And when you tally it all up, Matthew, over the entire United States, which impacted not only us, but it went on to impact Georgia, the Carolinas, Virginia, the Northeast. It was the 10th costliest storm in U.S. history at $15 billion. All right, what about this year? Okay, couple predictions we normally look at. Now, nowadays there are so many different outfits that do predictions. NOAA came out with their official forecast last Thursday or last week, and they called for basically an 80% chance of either a normal or an above average season. Okay, anywhere from 11 to 17 storms, 5 to 9 hurricanes, 2 to 4 being major hurricanes. Okay, so that's a little bit above average, especially if you look at the mid to high level of that range. Why do they say that? Well, they're kind of keying on the fact that there's going to be a weak or a non-existent El Nino across the Atlantic, and I'll go into that a little bit more in just a moment. Near or above average water temperatures in the tropical regions, and weaker than average vertical wind shear. And wind shear is basically a lot of twisting and turning of winds as you go up in the atmosphere. The more twisting and turning at different levels and different speeds, that kind of interrupts a hurricane circulation. Hurricanes get their strength from air going in the storm at the bottom, swirling up through the center at the top, and then being exhausted out the top. So if you get a lot of twisting and turning of winds in there, that will interrupt that breathing process, so to speak, and the hurricanes have a tough time getting going. They can kind of weaken with all the vertical wind shear around. So if that's weak, if we have water temperatures that are favorable, water temperatures have to be at least 81 degrees, and weaker non-existent El Nino, that's why they're calling for a decent chance of a near above average season. Colorado State in early April came out with their forecast, and they're calling for 11, they're calling for 11 storms, 4 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. And this is at the lower end of the NOAA's range. In fact, this amount of hurricanes is below their range. Okay? Now, this forecast was put out in early April, and I saw a statement from them indicating that some things are changing. So when they come up with their June forecast, they're probably going to up it just a little bit. El Nino, they're calling for basically a pretty decent El Nino, whereas NOAA's forecasting a weaker non-existent El Nino. All right, what is El Nino? Well, El Nino is warmer than normal East Pacific water temperatures, and this would be a graphic here. All the darker the red, the warmer the water temperatures. Well, you're saying, well, what does that have to do with us in the Atlantic? What does that have to do with us in Port St. Lucie? Well, what happens is when you get a lot of warm water in the Eastern Pacific, you get a lot of rising air that produces a lot of thunderstorms in this part of the world. Okay, and those thunderstorms will actually have a lot of outflow. The winds will start pushing out, and they'll, believe it or not, they'll go all the way to the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and that will actually cause wind shear, and again, that will weaken or disrupt hurricanes. So the more El Nino you have, the better off you are for having a weaker than normal hurricane season. This graphic indicates, I'm going to try to play it one more time here, but this graphic shows kind of a three-dimensional perspective of what El Nino is, and it shows basically the wind from Indonesia blows across the Pacific. It pushes the water, the warmer, it pushes the cooler water away, and the warm water is able to upwell up, so you get, again, you get those warmer water temperatures. Believe it or not, does anybody recall that we've already had one tropical cyclone this year out in the Atlantic? Yes, we have. We've already had tropical cyclone Arlene back in March. Okay, yeah, we can actually, believe it or not, in the Atlantic, there have been tropical cyclones in every month of the year. Maybe you recall, or maybe you don't, way back, I think it was in 2005 when we had Wilma here, we had a storm way into December and even January. In fact, we exhausted the alphabet, and then we had to go to alpha, beta, and into the Greek alphabet, believe it or not. That was the busiest season on record, by the way. Anyway, Arlene was harmless, formed as a low-pressure area. It was non-tropical for a while, then kind of spun around near Bermuda and the Azores and really didn't impact anybody. But again, it was the first name system, so we've already got one out of the way. And these are the Atlantic storm names this year. Anybody here with that name or know anybody on this list with that name? A couple folks. Well, just a warning, it might be a little challenging if one of these storms is named and they're headed towards our area. There might be some jokes or, snide remarks about your name and a hurricane out there that's threatening us. Just thought I'd let you know. But there's Arlene out of the way. Brett, Cindy, Don, Emily, Franklin. Every once in a while I get questions from folks, hey, who comes up with these names? Or, I've got a name for that list. Can I insert a name? Well, what happens is the folks at NOAA, they actually have 6 lists of names. So every 6 years, these names are actually rotated and you start with a fresh list. Okay, so you may have seen these names in years past. The thing is, if a storm becomes memorable, if it causes a lot of damage or destruction, not only in the United States, but across the Caribbean or the Gulf or whatnot, they typically will do an assessment of that storm and they'll retire that name. Okay, so you'll never see Francis or Jean in one of those 6 lists. You'll never see Wilma or David or any of them because those storms were memorable and they did cause lots of problems. And it's a good idea. And then they'll insert a new name, and then again, every 6 years, that list will appear slightly altered if one of the names have been, quote, retired or not. And for those of you that are new, we always like to show this graph. This shows the month, the day. Here we are, June 1st. This gives the number of storms for 100 years that exist in the Atlantic. It's very low in June and stays fairly low right on into about early and mid-August. It slowly climbs up. And then we get a huge ramp up in the amount of storms from about mid-August until about mid-September, when the peak occurs September 10th. And then it goes down, and then there's a little bit of a secondary peak in October. And we know about secondary peaks. We had Matthew impact us last year. It was a close call. We had Wilma impact us back in 2005. And some of you that have good memories, we had the Tropical Storm Irene come right up the state from the Florida Keys and give us a good slapping back in October of 1999. So the peak is typically mid-August to mid-October here. Normally we're pretty safe. But again, sometimes we've had tropical storms. We had Tropical Storm Faye, I believe, back in '08. If my memory serves correct, and they came through in July and caused a lot of flooding here on the Treasure Coast and a lot of tornado warnings. All right, a little bit on storm preparation, okay? At the beginning of the season, which is now, and really, you really want to have this done sometime by the end of June. You want to make sure you have your emergency plan ready to go, and that includes getting your vegetation trimmed around your house. Do you have shutters? Where are they? Do they work? Do you know how to use your shutters? Do you know how to put up your shutters? Do you have the right amount of screws for your shutters? Do you have the tools? Is your power drill ready to go? For those of you that have the electronic ones where you push a button and you just close them, that's great. Those are easy. Some of you might not have those. Some of them might require hours of work. So if you haven't used your shutters in years, or you're new to the area and you've got those big, accordion ones, the big metal ones, it might be a time, if you got some extra time in the weekend or whatever, take one panel out, bring it out, screw it up, see how it works. This way you're not scrambling trying to figure it out when the tropical storm force winds are closing in on the area. Are you in a flood zone? Are you in an evacuation zone? Are you going to evacuate? These are questions that you should ask yourself. Disaster supply kit, always good to have that ready. And that includes things like flashlights, batteries, first aid kit, water, non-perishable food, enough water and food for at least 3 days, copies of critical information. Are you familiar with technology? Hurricane Watch. Hurricane Watch usually means hurricane conditions are possible, but not certain within the next 48 hours. Hurricane Warning means hurricane conditions are likely within 24 hours. So these are some things that you need to know. Okay, and as far as evacuation zones, here we are right in the Port St. Lucie area. You'll notice it's interesting, on the barrier islands, you'd naturally expect hurricane evacuation zones for a category 1, 2, 3, but did you know inland up the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, there are evacuation zones well away from the ocean, because the water can come right up there and flood these areas near Port St. Lucie Boulevard. Can't see the name of that road, but some of the interior areas and way up the St. Lucie River here, even for a category 4 and 5, there are evacuation zones up across parts of White City. And and also for those of you up the St. Lucie River, they're near Palm City and Jensen Beach and Martin County, again, well away from the coast. So somewhat surprising. So if you're in an evacuation zone, the best advice is obviously to evacuate. If you're not, the typical knowledge is you really want to just make sure you ride out the storm with your disaster supply kit. You have the shutters and food. Some folks make plans to kind of hightail it out of town, but you really don't want to be getting on the roads if a hurricane watch or warning is up, because there's going to be a lot of traffic. You just want to ride out the storm. 36 hours before a storm, keep your TV and radio on for the latest updates. Build or restock your emergency supply kits. You want to revisit how to communicate with your family if the power fails. And nowadays, there's ever evolving technology. Some of you folks might not be into texting. The common knowledge is text messages are most reliable during a hurricane when the winds are blowing and some of the cell phone towers are down. Text messages will get through. They're reliable more quicker than calling on the phone. So that's a good thing to know. Again, review your evacuation plans. Keep your car in good working order. Full gas tank, emergency supplies, change of clothes, things like that. 18 to 36 hours before a storm. These are some things that you can do. You want to bring loose or lightweight objects inside. Your patio furniture, your grill, potted plants, little pool toys that might blow around, anything that you think that could be a projectile. You definitely want to get it inside. Even if your house is all shuttered up, your neighbor's house may not be. You don't want it blowing into your neighbor's yard and causing a problem. Propane tanks, everything like that. And you don't really want to be trimming your trees during, before a storm, unless there's something really, unless something minor. And then this would be the time that you want to put your shutters up. And as far as shutters, sometimes if a storm is borderline, we'll typically tell you on the news on CBS 12 or on our social media sites that it's time to put your shutters up, or maybe it's not time. Last year, I believe, just about all of us put the shutters up, even though it looked like it would be a close call. Because it was a Category 4 hurricane, you really didn't want to take any chances in case the jog was to the west rather than to the east that it was. Okay, 6 to 18 hours before a storm, turn on your TV or radio, charge your cell phone so you have a full battery. Nowadays, it's a good idea to have some extra backup power for your cell phone. They do sell packs for those in case the power is out. You can always plug it into that. And keep in mind, of course, that if your power goes out and your cell phone is low, if you have a car charger, you can go outside, as long as your car's not in the garage, and kind of charge your cell phone, with a charger in the car. So that's a good way to do things too. Within 6 hours of a storm, here are some tips as well, okay? Again, you want to stay at home if you're not in an evacuation area. Let your friends and family know where you are. You want to close your shutters, stay away from windows. Flying glass and broken windows obviously could injure you, you know that. Turn your refrigerator or freezer to the coldest setting, and only open when necessary. And if you lose power, the food will last longer, everything. What I usually do is I take all the ice out of my freezer, my automatic ice maker, and stick it into the bottom of the freezer, pour it into one of the trays there, fill that up as much as I can, store as much ice in the freezer, and then have it keep generating ice, well before the storm, before the power is out, that you've got extra ice in a cold reservoir for a little longer. Or you could take all that ice and put it into a big ice chest if you have that. This way you've got, a lot of ice around in case the power goes out for an extended period and, your food would spoil. Turn your TV or radio on, check city, county websites every 30 minutes. So again, these are things that you want to do within 6 hours of a storm. Okay, this year we've got some really great new forecast technology which is going to better help us to predict storms and better help us to tell you what kind of impacts they're going to be. NOAA, the National Hurricane Center, has come out with a couple new products, and this is one of them. It's called the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds. In this graphic you'll be able to see online. It would be on our website or the Hurricane Centers, and we may be presenting this on the air in a different format. But you'll notice with Hurricane Matthew, this is an example from last year, and you can see the earliest arrival of tropical storm force winds right here in Florida was going to be about Thursday or Wednesday night or into Thursday morning. And then here is the 5-day chance of receiving at least tropical storm force winds. So this always existed. This earliest arrival time is going to be projected this year. So we hope to give this out if hurricanes come close, and to give you a better indication of, typically when tropical storm force winds are coming, you don't want to be doing anything outdoors anymore. In other words, your shutters, you could look at this graphic and let's say we're on Sunday night and say, okay, I need to get my shutters put up here in Port St. Lucie or St. Lucie County by Wednesday night before dark. So it's a great graphic to let you know when your preparation should be done outside. Of course, we all know what the cone is. In previous years, we had the cone with the reds are the hurricane warnings, the blues are the tropical storm warnings, and then there's the cone of possibilities. This is from a different storm a couple of years ago, Joaquin. But now they're going to be issuing this graphic, and we would hope to show this on the air and also online and digitally, of the extent of tropical storm force winds. So this is very telling, because lots of times there's a misconception that if you're outside the cone that you're safe, that there's not going to be a problem. But many times that's not the case. If you just went on that, you'd say, here's the cone, and if I live in the Western Bahamas, if I live in Grand Bahama, I'm safe, but you're not, because this yellow is an example of tropical storm force winds extending way out to the coast of Cuba, up to parts of the Bahamas that are outside of the cone. So even though you're outside the cone, because the storms can be so big, the winds can extend outside. So we like those graphics. Hopefully they'll be able to get the message out a little better and help make things a little bit clearer for when you are preparing for a storm or hurricane. Big technology change. GOES-R, the new satellite, was launched back in November up there at Cape Canaveral. It's a big deal. It's a new satellite which is going to be giving us a really good bird's eye view inside hurricanes. It will be detecting lightning a lot quicker. It's also going to be detecting what we call the Saharan air layer, or African dust. And a lot of times that Saharan air layer has really kind of messed up and confused the forecast. We've thought storms are going to increase in intensity. All of a sudden, they mysteriously weaken in the middle of the Atlantic. There have been a few instances in the last several years. This will be able to detect that Saharan air layer a lot better and hopefully give us better intensity forecasts and a better indication of if a storm's going to weaken or not. Extreme high resolution will be able to see satellite imagery every minute rather than the current every 15 minutes. Which you'll be able to see it intensifying better. We'll be able to see the lightning. We'll be able to see the rainfall in there a lot more accurately. Okay, so this is a picture of the satellite. This was just announced that it's going to be parked over the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere. So we will be at a big advantage here in getting data for hurricanes. Not just hurricanes, but for the weather in general. So we're really excited about that. Here's a close-up picture of what a satellite looks like. You know, you've got the big antenna, you got picture-taking devices all inside here. It transmits back, and again, just great technology from NOAA, which will help us to better anticipate hurricanes and the intensity and tracks. One slide on climate change. I always get some questions about this. What's climate change going to do as far as hurricanes? Will it impact hurricanes? How will it impact hurricanes? Well, this is a graphic from Climate Signals, and you can kind of follow the flow chart. If we have increased gas emissions, carbon dioxide, and we've had that since the Industrial Revolution, that can, when you add it to the atmosphere, given all things the same, you're going to warm up the globe a little bit. When you warm things up, you're going to increase sea surface temperatures, okay? And when you do that, the atmosphere can hold more moisture. When the atmosphere can hold more moisture, you're going to get more extreme precipitation events. In other words, in a hurricane, instead of maybe getting 5 inches in a storm, you might get 8 or 9. That could include an increased flood risk. And since we're adding, and you go back, since we're adding that could impact the Atlantic hurricane season. So if a hurricane comes along, maybe a storm from 20 years ago, and you got some flooding, maybe you get a little bit more flooding now. If you go another way, if the globe is warming, we have glacier and ice street melt that will lead to rising sea levels. So if the water is several inches higher and you get the same amount of winds, you're going to get that much more increased coastal flooding due to the expansion of the ocean and the winds pushing the water up a little bit higher because the sea level is higher overall. And so again, you can tie that into the Atlantic hurricane season. So there's many different ways to look at it. Studies have shown that increased carbon dioxide emissions and climate change will not really exactly increase the amount of total storms around the globe. In fact, when you look at all the oceans, studies have shown that it might actually decrease the amount of storms overall, not necessarily Atlantic, but overall when you look at the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and whatnot. But the storms that are out there because of warm ocean temperatures could be more intense, and they could intensify quicker. So just something to keep in the back of your mind as far as climate change and how it might affect the hurricane season. All right, anyway, just want to thank everybody for coming to the Hurricane Expo, and I appreciate you sitting here through the presentation. Again, make sure you have the CBS 12 weather app downloaded. You get weather information. We've got Facebook and Twitter accounts. If you want to get on there, you got more questions, just get in contact with me. Do a like, send a comment, anything. Also, you can email me at ehrenberg@sbgtv.com. Maybe a question comes to you after you leave the Hurricane Expo. Just come up and just get in touch with me that way. But again, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.